Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Making the Case for Energy Management Projects. We are looking forward to having a great session today. We've got lots of information to cover, so we will ask you to just remain with your mics muted, cameras off, but please feel free to put questions into the chat. We will try and leave time at the end of the session to get to your questions. My name is Lisa Ray. I'm the Business Development Manager at CIET, and I'm joined by Stephen Dixon from Know Energy, who is going to be walking you through the bulk of the material today. So welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
Stephen,
Lisa. Yeah.
did you want to advance the slide and we'll just explain a little bit about the format here. So this is the first webinar in a two-part series. So as you can see on the screen there, we are going to be talking about financial analysis and quantifying value of energy management projects and energy efficiency upgrades. And then in webinar 2, we're going to be focusing more on building the business case and the decision-making process, considering benefits, and something called the one-page proposal, which you will learn about in the next webinar. So hopefully you can join us for both webinars in this two-part series because you will see how they link together and really between the two of them provide you with all of the information that you need to be able to make a business case for energy management projects within your organization.
I think we have some announcement of upcoming awards at the end of October, Lisa.
That's right. That's right. As you can see on the screen, the Save on Energy 2024 Energy Management Excellence Awards are coming up in just a few weeks on October 29th. So please, if you are able to, join us for that. It's going to be a great day filled with workshops and networking. So please feel free to register for that and join us at International Center in Mississauga on the 29th.
Great. I'll get going, Lisa, then. I think.
Great. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, so today what we're going to be talking about, obviously the title is Making the Case for Energy Projects, and it's making the financial and business case. So overall, we're going to provide you with some tools, some techniques, show you some hands-on experience with building that business case for an energy efficiency investment. And really, there's probably two purposes amongst the folks that are there today, many of you. First of all, it may be that you're external to an organization and you're selling to a prospect, to a customer. So your equipment, vendor, supplier, and so on. And so you're selling to a customer who's the end user of energy. On the other hand, maybe it's an internal selling situation where you're securing buy-in for a project that you're doing. Maybe you're working as an energy manager within a municipality or another organization, and you're looking for a positive decision towards an energy project that you've come up with. So in this first session, we'll focus on building the financial case around that project. And as Lisa said, in the second session, we'll focus more on building the business case, including the financial case, and making a compelling argument for getting a yes for that decision. So before I begin, and many of you have probably seen these before, I always like to sort of broaden the picture when it comes to energy management. And we're going to be talking about financial things, a few technical things today, but ultimately, right, to be successful at energy management, we have to deal with really three circles, whether it's doing projects like we're talking about today or just simply doing operational improvements. So in fact, we have to improve things technically, which means either operating equipment better or putting in more efficient technologies, and that's certainly something that people are looking at today in terms of lighting, pumps, fans, boilers, changing boilers out to heat pumps and those kinds of things, and maybe making the case for technology. Ultimately, we can't lose sight of the fact that if we're looking at how we operate that equipment, even if we're looking at new projects, we always have to keep in mind that the human aspect, that the human factor, people's behavior. And certainly that, it's even the case when you're dealing with the decision maker, making sure that they're aware, right, and have a reasonable understanding of what you're asking them to do. Certainly when it comes to operating equipment and the new equipment you're putting in, don't lose sight of the fact that, having good procedures and basically developing good habits around that equipment and feedback when it comes to doing a capital investment, certainly having feedback, doing the monitoring so that we can see as an organization the efforts, how they're paying off financially. Ultimately then, as we all work together and, no one's alone in this, right? Certainly as an energy manager, you're not alone. You've got other people in your organizations. You got to work together to build that energy managing culture. So certainly, making sure that when we develop our proposals, and this will come in more in the second part of this webinar, but making sure we keep in mind, what's important to the organization as well. And this is an organizational function. And that's where sustainability and persistence will come from. So keeping it all together, the three circles, success is at the center there. All right. Later on, and again, in the second part of this webinar, we'll be asking you to think about all the other benefits beyond the direct and indirect energy savings. What do I mean by direct and indirect energy savings? Well, if we do a lighting retrofit, we certainly get some savings in terms of electricity. We may actually get some air conditioning savings because less heat load, but we have to be honest and make sure that in those calculations, we also include maybe the impact on gas consumption, a marginal increase in gas. Definitely by reducing energy in almost every case, we'll see that positive environmental impact reduction. And what I always like to say is look for ways in building your business cases to factor in the improvement in reliability and maybe the commensurate reduction in maintenance required. I don't mean avoiding maintenance. I mean, if equipment's more reliable, we don't have to work as hard to maintain it. And what I find over the years is that equipment that's operating inefficiently, right, is actually also unreliable because the energy that's being used inefficiently contributes to unreliable operation, wear and tear on the system. So I always say, look for a way to improve the reliability of equipment. You may just find a way to improve efficiency. We can certainly bring those factors in our business cases. And ultimately, from the human point of view, comfort, quality, productivity, safety, these are all things that can result from a good energy project. So don't just focus on the financial or the energy side. Look at all the benefits that can ensue, because that's really what's going to make a strong case when it comes to pitching these projects to whoever is the decision maker. To begin with, we're going to talk, as I said today, much more on the financial side of it, so we're going to dig down into that. Now, business cases get approved properly quantify the energy cost and carbon benefit. Now, I see a lot of business cases. I saw one a little while ago where there was 30 pages of analysis to come up with a costing. They did a half a page of analysis on the energy side. The uncertainty on the costing was pretty small, but the uncertainty on the energy thing was quite large. And that means the overall uncertainty in this investment can be quite high. And decision makers don't like uncertainty. They want to take a risk. We want to make sure we're coming forward with credible numbers. For my part, I like to use RedScreen to do this, or spreadsheets at times when RedScreen doesn't work for me. But having good tools and having a consistent approach to evaluating technically those opportunities is very important, making sure that we have the energy cost and carbon benefit quantified properly. Once we've got that, right, and we can translate all those things to a financial benefit, then we can begin our financial analysis. So I'm going to start off with a question when it comes to financial analysis. And this is kind of a leading question. You might see through this one, maybe not. An energy project that costs $900 and yields electricity savings of $300 a year. That's one project, all right? I've got another project over here which will deliver a savings of $500 a year, but it'll cost me $1,500 to implement it. Which is the better project? That's my question to you. Kind of a leading question, maybe a trick question. I don't know. But what do you think, Lisa? Which is the better project, right? Kind of, who knows?
They both look pretty good to me, Stephen.
They do, right? I mean, because one might argue that, you get your money back in 3 years. I don't like to use that word simple payback, but that is what you could calculate. Unfortunately, the simple payback here won't allow us to determine which is really the better project, because there's other pieces of information we have to bring into play. Somebody might say, somebody's typed in the chat there, how long is these projects in place, right? And what does the money cost us? And how does the inflation play into this? So basically, there's a lot more that we have to take into account to do a proper and rigorous financial analysis than simply just the cost and the savings per year without any consideration of time. So to do good financial analysis, we need some other information, some other parameters. Clearly, we do need to know the capital cost of the project, how much we have to put out up front, but we also need to understand maybe we have to refit this project over time. So it isn't just the upfront costs, maybe there's downstream costs that are reinvestments in this project in order to keep the savings coming. Obviously, understanding what the energy savings are and then translating that to cost. And that's an area that I do tend to focus on too, is making sure we use the right price. When we take an energy consumption reduction, say 5,000 kilowatt hours, what's the price we apply to that? I'm going to tell you to do one thing here today, if it's not written on a slide, and that is not to use the marginal price. Sorry, not to use the average price, but to use the marginal price when you're evaluating savings. What the next kilowatt hour not used is really worth, and it's not the average price from your bill. So making sure that you get the energy savings quantified and you translate that properly to dollars. The time horizon, the period over which the project will deliver value. Either of those projects could continue to deliver value for 10 years. How do we take the value coming out right after we get our money back, right? Well, that's why we need to do a longer term, or what's called a time-based analysis. There's another factor we need to know: what's the money worth, or how much does it cost for us to put money into this project? What's the weighted cost of capital? If I'm buying a house, give you an example, residential, if I'm buying a house, I don't want to put solar panels on the roof when I buy it, and I want to calculate what the cost of the money is to put in the solar panels. If I build the cost of those solar panels into my mortgage, then essentially, simplistically, the interest rate on my mortgage is the cost of the capital I'm putting into those solar panels. And any project will attract a certain cost of money. In organizations, we would typically call this a discount rate, but many organizations will also refer to it as a weighted cost of capital, right? So where they get capital from for projects, and what's the weighted average cost of capital, right? Often it's defined by the minimum rate of return, right, from the project required by the investor. So if projects don't make a certain rate of return, often called the hurdle rate, they don't get considered, right? And so you have to make at least the hurdle rate, right, before you actually even are considered. But certainly that's the the cost of the money also. And keep in mind that some people will perceive energy projects as having a risk, right? Maybe that's because they don't understand them, and you can mitigate that a little bit with some education. But higher risk tends to increase the discount rate. That is the cost of the money that's applied here. We'll see how we're going to use these terms in the next few slides. But the last thing we really can't ignore is the inflation rate. The inflation rate makes the savings that occur today actually greater in the future. As much as all of us really don't like inflation, it actually does make an energy project better, because if the commodity that we're actually avoiding consuming, the energy, gets more expensive into the future, our savings grow. Now, likewise, the real definition of the discount rate is the rate that we have to apply to take the future dollar savings and bring them back to today's dollars. So, and that's where it gets its term, the discount rate, right? So, and you've probably all heard the term or the phrase that a dollar today is worth far more than a dollar 5 years from now. And that's because, and what we do is we take the dollar 5 years from now using the discount rate or the lost opportunity cost, we bring it back to today's dollars. And what we're going to end up doing here is comparing today's dollars to today's dollars. So we're going to look at, what we put out today in capital, what we put out 2 years from now to refit, and then what the savings are coming back. And we're going to bring all those present values and future values back to present value, right? In order to do an apples to apples comparison and calculation. And that's what we call financial analysis. So the formulas that we're going to use to do this are pretty simple to begin with anyway. You've probably seen these formulas before. I'm going to start with the bottom one because that's actually kind of maybe easier to understand. And what this tells us is if we know today in dollars how much a project might save, then we can calculate, say, 5 years from now, if we know the inflation rate on that energy commodity that we're saving, we can calculate using that bottom formula, right, what the future savings are going to be. Now, that future amount, as I said before, is not worth the same as the dollar today. So a dollar in the future is worth less than a dollar today. The way we calculate and bring back that future dollar to a present value is using the top formula, which actually turns out to almost be a rearrangement of the bottom formula. So whereas inflation makes present savings greater, the present value formula, or we call the discounting formula, makes the present value of the future amounts less. Because you can look at that formula, and no matter what terms you put into that, either the discount rate or the years, that present value is always going to be less than or equal to the future amount, right? Can never be greater, right? So we have two formulas which allow us now to take present savings, calculate what they would be in the future, and take those future savings and bring them back to present value. Because what we invest today is in fact present value. We need to take that stream of money coming back in terms of savings and convert it to present value so we can do an apples to apples comparison. So those are the easy formulas, right? They get a little more complicated. When it comes to actually evaluating these projects, there's two things that I like to use. I know a lot of people will use simple payback, which is simply, what is that? That's the cost divided by the savings. How many years do I have to wait to get my money back? But there's actually maybe some better ways to look at that. The first formula says, if I wait a certain number of years, so I get, say I wait 10 years, and I get savings coming back over 10 years, right? And I calculate using the slide, the previous formula, what the present value of those future savings are, and I sum those all up, right? That's the sum of the present value of the cash inflows or the savings. So that's the amount of money this project gives me back. If I divide that by how much I invest today, which is simply my investment today at the present value, it tells me how many more times as much money do I get back than I put in. So it's like if I could have a savings to investment ratio of say 3.7, you'll see that number later, which means that if I put $1,000 into this project and I wait 10 years, I'm going to get $3,700 back, right? I'm going to get enough to pay my initial investment back plus something that's left over. Now, that something that's left over, financial people call that something. It's called the net present value. So if you take the formula from above and simply, rather than dividing them one into the other, we subtract the investment from that future cash flow coming back adjusted to present value, then we get what we call the net present value, what's left over. So we could have a project, we invest $1,000, savings to investment ratio is 3.7. The present value of that project is going to be $3,700 in present value terms minus 1,000 or $2,700. That's what's left over. And there's a very important rule in investment in projects like this. If the net present value, if the net present value is less than 1, Lisa, what would you do? If the net present value is less than 1, or the savings to investment, the net present value is less than 0, I should have said, or the savings to investment ratio is less than 1, would you do the project or not? I don't want to put you on the spot.
I would say no. That doesn't sound like a good choice.
That's right, because if the net present value is less than 0, it means this project is taking money away from you, not giving it back. And you also know that from the savings to investment ratio. If we get less back than we put in, then that ratio is less than 1. We got to run away from that project. But many people will measure the value of a project, right, the quality of it, by what its net present value is and what that savings to investment ratio is. Some people call it, in fact, if you use RETScreen, they call it benefit to cost ratio, but it's the same thing, right? Adjusted for present value. So those are two simple results formulas. Some more complex ones involve what we call the internal rate of return. The internal rate of return is probably the most common one people have heard of. Some of you probably even haven't even heard of the modified internal rate of return. Even some financial people haven't really looked at this one before. Let's start with the internal rate of return. The way to think about the internal rate of return for a project is like if I took that $1,000 that I talked about in the previous slide, rather than investing in the project, I stuck it in the bank. The bank says, you leave it here for 5 years, we're going to be 5%, right, per annum with compound interest. All right, so the internal rate of return is really that 5% interest that they give you on it. Now, in an investment like a bank account, term deposit, something like that, you put your $1,000 in, that's your principal. It earns interest in the first year. That interest then is added into the principal, and moving into the second year, you earn interest upon the principal plus the interest from the previous year. That's what we call compound interest. So what's happening is your earnings, the interest you're earning, is reinvested at the same rate as the whole investment, right? At the face value of the investment. So that's what internal rate of return is for an energy project. It's like you take the savings you get from this project and you reinvest it in another project that's returning the same amount. Unfortunately, many cases in organizations or businesses, that's not necessarily what would happen. You wouldn't reinvest the savings in a project like this. It would probably go into that pool of capital, which would then be potentially invested at the discount rate somewhere else. So basically, the internal rate of return overstates the true rate of return in many situations. So we introduced the idea of a modified internal rate of return, where rather than assuming the reinvestment at whatever the IRR is, we assume a reinvestment at a more modest value. I typically will use the discount rate as a starting point for that reinvestment rate. The result is you get a more conservative rate of return, but maybe a more realistic one in terms of what the business will really receive. So if you want more information on that one, there's actually, there's supposed to be a link on this slide, but you can search on Investopedia, modified internal rate of return. You'll see pages of ideas around that. It's not an easy formula to calculate, but it's definitely something with a good spreadsheet, and we will provide you with a good spreadsheet today that you can calculate pretty easily the results. So those are the results formulas. Okay, what we're going to do next is, well, first of all, we're going to make sure you know that you're going to receive the spreadsheet, and you'll be able to download that from the website, I think, Lisa, also from the Save on Energy website as well. I'm not sure. You'll be sending people out these tools and information. So we're going to take a simple spreadsheet, and we're going to put all these formulas to work for us, and we're going to see how valuable an investment can be. And I always like to say that sometimes energy efficiency projects can be your most valuable investment. All right, so rather than sort of trying to decipher our way through the spreadsheet on the screen here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it step by step through here. All right, so I'm going to start with the top left-hand corner of the spreadsheet. And I'm going to take a project that costs us $1,000 to implement. And we've done some calculations, and we've determined that that project will deliver $500 a year in, say, electricity savings. We also know that that electricity price is likely to, we never know for sure what inflation is going to do, but we'll say is likely to inflate at 4% per year. So we could simplistically say without inflation, we're going to get $500 a year into the future every year. But with inflation, in fact, that $500 right at the beginning becomes $520 after the first year, $541 after the second year, $562 after the third year. So what we've done is we now calculated in these three numbers, $520, $541, and $562, the future amount of the present savings. All right, so it's just a restatement of those savings considering inflation. Now, let's apply the present value formula where we take the future amounts and bring it back to present value so we can do an apples to apples comparison. All right, so here we have the 520, the 541, the 562, which are the savings with inflation included. Now we're going to apply the present value formula where we take those future amounts and bring them back to today's dollars. And for that, we're going to need to know the number of years. Obviously, we have that in the table here, and what's called the discount rate. It's nothing to do with discounts. Don't ever relate it to, I get, what's the discount I get on that thing when I buy it because I'm a good, no, it's nothing to do with discounts. It's all to do with taking those future amounts and discounting them back to present value. It's the terminology straight here. All right, so let's do that here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the $520, and this is the first year, so I'm going to use this formula and the 10% discount rate, and I'm going to calculate that 520 after the first year is actually only really worth $473. That's actually less than the 500. That's kind of weird. We started out with 500, we inflated it to 520, and now we've discounted it back to 473. Well, it turns out that the inflation rate was less than the discount rate. So remember, these two formulas are just the reverse of one another. So in this case, the discount rate's winning out, right? So in fact, those streams of savings are going to diminish over time. 541 becomes 447, 562 becomes 423. But all's not lost, right? Just because they're diminishing doesn't mean they're still not valuable to us. Because if we take the $1,000 we originally invested, and which is a negative or a cash outflow, that's why it's red, and we add to it the 473 in present value, it's coming back because of the savings, now we're only down by 527. And now we add to it the second year, right, discounted cash flow coming back from the savings, now we're down by 80. And then eventually, after we get to the third year, we add the 423 to the minus 80, and we get 342. We pop positive, right? We pop out positive. Now, if you were to calculate the simple payback for this, you would say that this project would pay back in 2 years. Does this project pay back in 2 years in reality? No. Even when we consider inflation and discounting, the project hasn't paid back by the end of the second year. It's somewhere between the second and the third year that we actually get to it breaking even and then positive in the third year. Some people call that the complex payback. So you've heard the term simple payback. Well, some people will tell you the complex payback takes into account the inflation rate and the discount rate. But it stops at the point you get your money back, right? I want to look well beyond when you get your money back. Now, does anybody know what I've calculated in this bottom row here? I've already talked about this before. It's the cumulative present value of the net cash flow. Well, at least if you take the N and the P and the V, what do you get? The net
Sounds
present
like our
value.
net present value.
Exactly, right? So that is the net present value, right? Even though I didn't tell you that to begin with, right? So here we have our present value of the net cash flow using that discount rate. So then the net present value after 3 years is $342. Now, we could put that in a graph so it looks like something like this, right? Now, and sometimes don't underestimate the value of a graph. I've actually seen this kind of graph really be a compelling argument for doing a project. I'll tell you about that one in a second. All right, so let's look at these other factors for the first 3 years. So we talked about the internal rate of return, right? So we can calculate the internal rate of return. Now, did I give you a formula to do that? No, and it's a complicated formula. Can a spreadsheet do it? Yes, right? So, and REScreen can do it too, but spreadsheet can do it. So you simply have an IRR function, and you dial in the parameters and you get the 28.3. And actually a spreadsheet also has the MIRR function. So we dial in the same information, but now we tell it the reinvestment rate. The assumption I've made in the spreadsheet is the reinvestment rate is the same as the discount rate. All right, so now we got a modified internal rate of return of 21.3%. It's a more conservative answer, right? A more tamed down version, okay? The net present value, as you see, if you only waited 2 years, this project's not giving you anything, right? It's still taking money away. But after the 3rd year, you get something left over. That's the net present value. If you invested $1,000, it gave you $1,342 back, paid back the 1,000. Your savings to investment ratio was 1.3, right? Because remember, you put 1,000 in, you're left over with 1,342. So the total you got back was 1,342, and then you divide that by the 1,000 you put in, and you get the 1.3 is the savings to investment ratio. So again, anything that's negative in NPV or less than 1 for an SIR, savings to investment ratio, run away. This project is not giving you money. All right, let's stretch the time horizon, because this is where it gets fun, right? I mean, $342 is not a bad amount of money in net present value after 3 years. But look at this. This project actually yields 2,721 as a net present value after 10 years. So if you're patient and you wait the 10 years and that lighting retrofit continues to save, you know, those kilowatt hours, because those lights are going to last for 10 years in the right situation, I'd say, you know, maybe 2,500, 3,000 hours a year, you pick the right lights, you're going to be delivering savings out for 10 years anyway, right? And now you've got 2,721, right, as your net present value, right? So the project actually returns to you 3721. You pay back your 1,000, and you get 2721 left over. Now your savings to investment ratio gives you back 3.7 times as much as you put into the project. That's a pretty attractive project. But we look at our MIRR and our IRR. The MIRR, those are like, I don't know if they're tongue twisters, but they're really hard to say. The MIRR, the conservative one, is 25.4%. You go, well, I wish I had the 55. But honestly, I just sat with my financial advisor yesterday. I wish I had the 25. I wish I had 12% on my investment portfolio, right? So when you think about it, when you look at it this way, energy efficiency projects are a great investment, you know, certainly compared to most of our own retirement portfolios. So treating energy, right, efficiency as an investment can have some pretty rewarding results if we look at it properly. I mean, 2 years, okay, maybe somebody says, I'm going to do this project for 2 years, but that doesn't really amplify the value of the project. 2 years you don't get excited about it, but you definitely get excited about getting back 3.5 or more times as much money as you put into a project. Now, this graph here can have really compelling results too. I was once working with a maintenance manager for a warehousing operation, and it was interesting because he had a lighting project in the books, which had a 6-month simple payback. And his plant manager had refused to do the project. You know, think about it, 6 months, simple payback. You know, most of us would just jump at that, but obviously this person didn't. What was interesting is when he took the numbers from his project, dialed it into my spreadsheet, it showed a discounted cumulative cash flow of nearly $300,000. It was a crazy high number. And when he put the spreadsheet, the whole spreadsheet, right? I think it was this one here in front of the manager. The manager kept looking at the graph. He was trying to explain to him all the numbers up above, but the manager kept looking at the graph. And he said, "What does this graph mean?" And he explained, "Well, this is the cash that this project is giving back to us. Even when you consider the weighted cost of capital or whatever, it's still, in his case, it was like $300,000, right? Because it was a pretty large lighting retrofit." The plant manager looked at the maintenance manager and said, "Why aren't we doing this project?" He was the one that was refusing, but that graph suddenly changes his perspective on this thing completely. He needed cash, and this thing could deliver cash to him within a year. So that's basically, it's a great way to make a compelling argument for getting a positive yes to these types of projects, making the case, or at least part of it anyway. All right. If you're using RETScreen, and I apologize because on this slide here, some of the little things kind of got moved here. But in RETScreen, there is actually a way to, in fact, do these calculations as well. So RETScreen allows us to, in fact, enter in the $500 for the savings, the $1,000 for the project in our cost tab, and then we can move over to our financial analysis tab. And again, this one has got display, so I'm just going to move this over here, the little green thing here. So I'm going to move it over to the cost or the savings. Forget it. Finance tab should be up there in the center. I'm going to move it over to here. There's a finance tab, so we go to cost, we go to saving or finance. Now we dial in the 4% interest or inflation rate. Remember that from before? The project life is 10 years, right? 55% internal rate of return. That's what my spreadsheet showed you. A 2-year simple payback. And based on the inflation, now we got a 1.9-year simple payback. But that doesn't include the discounting. So that isn't a complete complex payback. Some people ask me in RETScreen, why is this simple payback thing? Well, it's the savings taking into account the inflation, but not the discounting. And then we can go even further in RETScreen and do what we call level 2 financial analysis, right? And in level 2 financial analysis, then again, we use our inflation rate. We can use our discount rate, which is then the weighted cost of capital. What's the cost to get the money to do this? The reinvestment rate, which I default in most cases to begin with, unless I'm told otherwise, to the discount rate, and the project life. And now we can calculate all the other results. And we come down here to the center section, our 55% internal rate of return, 25.5% MIRR, modified internal rate of return, right? Our savings to cost ratio, which RETScreen calls benefit to cost ratio, or sorry, savings to investment, which RETScreen calls benefit to cost, 3.7, and our net present value of $2,721. So exactly the same as a spreadsheet. So whether you use RETScreen or a spreadsheet, you're going to get the same answer. And the answer is going to be, I think, a lot more compelling than a simple payback in most cases. And you get some nice graphs in there as well. So there are tools to do this. You got techniques, good financial analysis tools, spreadsheet, which will provide you with, and RETScreen as well. And the other side, if you're using RETScreen too, is that you can also quantify the carbon benefit. So in this simple project that I didn't actually calculate the savings in RETScreen. I just come up with savings numbers. But let's say I did calculate the savings in RETScreen, and RETScreen did calculate for me the carbon reduction, right? Small or large, whatever it is, I can then quantify that. So RETScreen has tools. These are kind of a more advanced topic, but there is tools in RETScreen on the emissions tab, if you've ever looked at it, where you can enter in your, say, the carbon price, or in this case, the carbon tax, the number of years it's going to keep going up, which we know it's going to go up until 2030, and we can enter in the rate at which it's going to escalate, which turns out to be, if it's $80 a ton today, for 6 years, right, into 2030, it needs to escalate at 13.4%. So then we can calculate, then we can quantify the benefit, right, of the carbon tax in the calculation, because we're now avoiding the carbon tax as well for that energy that we're not using. So RETScreen has all the tools to do that. You can't do it in a simple spreadsheet, but if you use RETScreen, well, you could actually probably calculate the carbon avoidance in a spreadsheet as well. But the message here is, if you're going to build that financial case, make sure we include the carbon tax in it as well. Now, just as an aside, if you're using natural gas and your price is 45 cents a cubic meter, that actually implicitly includes the carbon tax. So I wouldn't double account by doing it on top of that. But in cases where you don't have that, then you can do this type of calculation. All right, so your homework, right, for today is to take this out and give it a try. That's all we're going to ask you to do is go back, take that spreadsheet, and give it a try. Try to play with it. You can't break it. If you do, just go and take the email that you received it in, or go and download it from the website again and do it. I honestly can tell you right now that years ago, as a technical person, my background is more technical than financial, I actually walked away from teaching this kind of course because I was not comfortable with it. But at one point or another, somebody said, no, you can do this, Steve. So what I did was I built the spreadsheet to teach myself how this stuff works. That's why I built the spreadsheet. So it's really a learning tool. But I'll be honest with you, I know many people use this, just to do their project analysis as well. So, but by playing with the spreadsheet, putting numbers in, seeing what the numbers do, there's really only 6 numbers you have to put in here, right? And you could, you just assume the discount rate and the reinvestment rates are the same. Then just my spreadsheet, when it comes to you, will default the financing and the reinvestment rate to be the same as the discount rate. So all you need is cost, savings, inflation rate, discount rate. That's it. Everything else gets calculated. You can look at the results after 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. You can actually enter numbers in here. Let's say you had to refit the lighting system after 5 years. You had to put another $100 in to, replace something. You can actually include that in there. So you can include the refit cost in the spreadsheet as well. The spreadsheet can be, if you want to extend it out beyond 10 years, actually there's a version of it on the Save on Energy website under the resources for efficient electrification. There's a spreadsheet version of this that goes out to 30 years. You can add rows in here. So if you want to add rows with other costs and savings in there, you can do that as well. So it's entirely up to you how you use it. There's no password on it. Take it. You can unprotect it and then play with it to your heart's content. And honestly, somewhere on here, my email address will be, if you get stuck with it and you want a bit of guidance, or Steve, what did I do wrong? I'm happy to help you. Maybe even give you a little bit of coaching on how to do this analysis on your projects. So I'm just going to take a look at where we're going from here. I think it's back to you, Lisa, at this point. Maybe, I'm not sure if we're going to have any questions in this session or not, but time for question and answers. And maybe, Lisa, you can just tell us a little bit about the support that exists beyond this webinar. And don't forget to come back for the second half, because we get to talk about my other favorite thing, and that's the one-page proposal. And it was funny because I had somebody call me up the other day. He said, Steve, I took that one-page proposal thing you talked about, and I put my project into it. I presented it to my customer, and they went for it. He said it took them 10 minutes to make a decision with a one-page proposal. So that's a little tempt for a little bit of a carrot for next week. Go ahead, Lisa.
That's great. Thanks so much, Stephen. What a lot of great information. As you can see on the screen here, there are lots of tools and resources available to you. You can find all of this on the Save on Energy website. The recording of this session, as well as a PDF presentation, will be available on that website as well at saveonenergy/training and support. So please do visit that webpage and take a look at all the great resources that are available to you, including coaching sessions, lots of case studies and tools and calculators. So please do take the time to have a look at the resources that are available for you there. And of course, also please do take a moment to register for the post-webinar support if you would like to connect through Save on Energy for any additional supporting or coaching. Please do take a moment to do that. So there is the website, saveonenergy.ca/training and support. And again, we do hope that you will register for part 2 of this webinar series, part 2 of 2, which is happening on October 30th, I believe. Stephen, is that the date?
I have to go back and look. I got so many going on right now. It's funny.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But also let us know what you think about this one. I think, Lisa, you posted in the chat an evaluation link to fill it in. Let us know what you thought. We always like your feedback, and we'll use that to make the next one better. Thank you. Absolutely.
So we will see you in a couple of weeks for the next in the series of Making the Case. Thanks, everyone, for attending today. And thank you again, Stephen.
You're welcome.
It's been very informative.
Take care, everybody. Have a good day.